Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Unfortunately, today I am away from the normal military and foreign affairs headquarters. I am reporting off-site, discussing off-site, so if you hear a microphone change, I am operating off my laptop as opposed to my desktop, which I normally use in my office space. So that's the reason for that change. I'm also in the great state of Nevada. I'm here at a conference in Las Vegas. I'm staying at Caesar's Palace. What do I think about Caesar's Palace? I'm going to get into that a little later. I may do a lesson in insanity about Caesar's Palace. Will I stay at Caesar's Palace again? No, absolutely not. Do not like this place for a number of reasons, and I'll explain that to you later and would encourage you not to go to Caesar's Palace. So on to the coverage of the war between Russia and Ukraine. It's very interesting now as I go through the mainstream media coverage of the war. We've gone from this Ukrainian counteroffensive that was taking place, really directed in the area from Zaporizhia east towards Volhodar. Again, the objectives of this operational offensive of the Ukrainian military was to move south, seizing control of objectives such as Tokmak, Melitopol, Berdyansk, and ultimately Mariupol, severing the land corridor between Russia proper and the Crimean Peninsula. That was the operational goal of the Ukrainian military. Ultimately, the goal for the Ukrainians was to drive down, seize all territory, basically west of Luhansk, rolling up the areas in Zaporizhia Oblast, the eastern bank of Kherson, and then have themselves sitting on the border of Crimea, basically where the Ukrainians were pre-war. And that didn't happen. The Ukrainians have made very little headway in this ongoing counteroffensive operation. If we pull up the defensive lines of Russian forces, you can clearly see the failure that has occurred in this Ukrainian offensive. And the Russians still maintain very robust defense lines, multiple very robust defense lines in this ongoing conflict. Now, at the same time, this offensive has failed in the south. The Russians have started a new offensive operation. This is a bit different. We're not seeing the same type of Russian maneuver warfare that we have observed early in the campaigns, where we saw this blitzkrieg type operation by the Russians, where they were trying to drive towards Kiev and multiple targets in Ukraine. The Russians are plodding forward very methodically, very slowly, again using this fix and destroy strategy, where they're moving forward, they're moving forces forward, identifying Ukrainian defensive positions, and then using overwhelming firepower in the form of fixed aircraft, airstrikes, fixed-wing aircraft, attack helicopters, glide bombs, heavy artillery, multiple launch rocket systems. And we discussed this before, how the Russians have the advantage of having an air force, and it's being seen in this conflict. Now, at the same time, this war is changing warfare. Whether we like it or not, war 20 years from now 10 years from now, 5 years from now, is changing, is going to change radically because of this conflict. This is a true multi-domain war where on one side you have the Ukrainians providing most of the ground forces for this campaign, while the North Atlantic Treaty Organization provides space-based assets. They are covertly using drones and fixed-wing assets against Russian forces, whereas the Russians are pretty much going this alone. Obviously, there is some assistance from China, possibly some other actors such as Iran in terms of the drones that are being handed over to the Russians. Look, the Russians were very much behind in the sphere of drone warfare. But look, the Russians are catching up very quickly. What we see now is much different than what the Russians were deploying in terms of drone capability. Again, now versus a year ago, a year plus ago, when the war started. Now the question is what is the Russian military going to look like in a year from now? What is the Russian military going to look like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now? Well, I can tell you it's going to look a lot different. Things are changing in the Russian military as they are here in the United States. Again, the way drones are being used, the way minefields are being used, the way artillery is being used. Again, it's very difficult to conduct maneuver operations with this type of reconnaissance in the form of drones and the space-based sensor capability that both sides are deploying on the battlefield. And I think the first area where we need to look at as warfare changes is going to be who controls space. Space is going to be more and more omnipresent in the discussion about warfare. Think about it. If a nation state is fully able to control space, and what I mean by that, I mean that one nation, one state, has the ability to deploy global positioning satellites, navigational satellites. If one nation state is able to deploy surveillance satellites, optical, advanced radars, what have you, that country is going to be able to control the clock, the war clock. And especially if one of these nations, be it the United States, China, Russia, is able to protect its space-based assets while at the same time destroying the space-based assets of its adversaries. Now look, I get some of you may say, well, they're going to create lasers, ground-borne lasers that are going to be able to destroy these satellite systems, possibly. But again, if you control space, if you have control of space, and you have the ability to identify where they're building these ground-based laser systems, then you can destroy them. Space is going to be incredibly important. And next is going to be drone warfare. Obviously, we are in the very early stages. We are in the drone and artificial intelligence infancy in terms of warfare. This is what is going to change in conjunction with space-based warfare and turn war into something that we can't even comprehend what it's going to look like in the future. Well, you may a little bit, but again, it's going to look a lot different than what war looks like now. And if one nation state jumps farther enough ahead where one nation state is not advancing in terms of drone technology, artificial intelligence, then that nation state is going to be defeated on the battlefield. And it is going to be decimated beyond comprehension. And now, right now, you can see China, Russia, the United States, Europe, rushing very quickly towards fully autonomous, both ground-based and aeronautical drone assets, even obviously ship, surface, marine drone warfare. We have seen it just recently with the Ukrainian attack on the Kerch Strait bridge. I mean, it's really incredible what we're seeing in this war and how it's going to change war in the future as this war continues and as countries continue to advance again in this sphere. But as we watch what is happening on the ground inside of Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, the war continues. And neither side has any intention on stopping this conflict right now. This conflict could last for years. When we first started analyzing this conflict, we knew that the war was going to be tough. It was going to be brutal. Look, two European industrial nation states going to war in the modern era is just something that we have not seen. It's been a long time. It has been a great many decades since we've seen two modern military powers go at it like we've seen in Ukraine, that have the industrial base, that have the ability to research and develop new technologies and then quickly deploy those technologies on the battlefield. And in the human equation, obviously Russia has over 140 million people. At the start of the conflict, the Ukrainians had 40 million, with about half of the population fleeing to Western Europe and other nation states, including some notorious content providers. I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, so again, as we watch the war, the prospect that the Ukrainians will achieve any sort of breakthrough in the south, again, running from Zaporizhzhia to Orikhiv, is incredibly remote at this point. At the same time, it's going to be very difficult for the Russians, who are also mounting large offensive operations in the north of the conflict, north of Seversk, running Seversk north towards Kupiansk, this area here. So it's going to be the same issue for the Russians. Are the Russians going to make great headway in this conflict? Are they going to seize large amounts of territory? Probably not. Not yet. It's going to take a while. Now, could that happen? Could we see the general collapse of the Ukrainian military? It's possible. The Ukrainians do not have, right now, the industrial capacity, the Air Force, to continue on fighting this war in perpetuity. But at the same time, as long as Western European nation states, the United States, continue to shovel in weapon systems, money, technical advice, advisors into this conflict, I think at this point the conflict is going to become a very status quo conflict. It is going to be a war of attrition. It's going to look a lot like what it looks like today, but at the same time, we're going to see more and more technologies being injected into the conflict. Both the Russians are working on stuff, as are the Ukrainians with its Western allies. So that's kind of where we sit. We will continue to report. We will continue to analyze. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. And as always, have a good day.